Hello and welcome to this Philosophy Sunday video. This video is going to be motivated by a number of events that have happened to me personally over the last few weeks. Not a single event, but a lot of them have been to do with the education of our youth, particularly those around about 15 to 18, which I think when you are developing as a person, that period of time is pretty chaotic, as people at that age usually realise that the sort of security and structure of school is about to change as they move towards the end of their school. In this country, kids do their GCSEs at 16 and they get those results. So that's the first time they've ever been judged in that way by society. Some of them come out all pleased with themselves, and other people don't do so well. And straight away they go from just being a kid at school like everybody else to someone who is now been placed in some sort of hierarchy of worth. Within that hierarchy, things like creativity, individuality, kindness, all these types of things are not valued that much. I would say as we go into the future and we look at the way we are moving from an industrial societal structure to a post-industrial societal structure, those attributes might be more important than maths and English. But of course, this is a contentious opinion, and I'm an old man now, and who's interested in my opinion? Because also, as you get older, there's another hierarchy that comes in, and you're no longer worth listening to that much, aren't you? So I was very aware of this when I was in education. It was great to be the young lecturer. The students identified with a bit more lean and naive and open-eyed, and I could go through and operate in a lot easier way because I was more malleable. The organisation that I worked in was telling me what to do and I was taking it in. This is how you teach, and then you start to learn because you did it so much. And the main way you learned was from being in front of an audience, a class. So I want to explain the change from me going from being a music lecturer to being a YouTuber. In the old days, after I'd been teaching for a long time, I didn't plan any lessons. And the reason I didn't plan any lessons because I came to realise that there was a structure that we need to follow, and in education that would be called the learning outcomes. So every lesson has a set of learning outcomes, but when you walk into that class, real life is going on and all sorts of things could happen. For example, it could be just the fact that we've got a show coming up and we're not rehearsed enough and the musician's got to rehearse, so we just drop the timetable and let them rehearse to just get on with that. Or, more interestingly, you could get onto a subject and then a student could put their hand up and ask a question, and that answer would go outside the learning outcomes, and then you're faced with a choice. And I decided it was better to follow what they were interested in. And fundamentally, I realised that if someone as a teenager, if education came along and said, look, you just do what you're best at, don't worry about anything else, which it doesn't. But if education was to say that to our young people, why would you do that? What if their interest is not maths and science or any of the STEM subjects? What do you do then? Well, they are not going to be able to compete in the areas they're not good at. The only way you can compete in the world is by doing what you're good at. That's it. There will be a whole ton of people who aren't really good at anything. We don't want to say that in education. We would rather follow some bad Rousseauian leftist idea of a blank slate. But I'm afraid that is just not the case. But in the case of students who were not very able at anything, what they did have very often was compassion, kindness, and a whole bunch of attributes like that. Love, be able to make you laugh, be funny. They had a whole bunch of things. And in a Western liberal democracy, we should be using our Western liberal democracy to exist in a world where people are allowed to be more than just their jobs and their skill set. We should be able to create a society, and this is very left-wing, I'm afraid, where the wealth that we create enables those people at the bottom to have a way of expressing themselves as well, and not to be judged on that expression, for it to be seen as being valid. This is my idea of what liberalism is. And so it upsets me quite a lot when I'm accused of not being that, but that video has been done last week twice and got me into all sorts of trouble. So in the morning, I would get up on my way to college, and I would have the night before be aware of what I'm about to teach, and I would work out in my head. I no longer needed to do lesson plans. I was an experienced enough teacher to be able to look at the learning outcomes, and I could, stand up and look like I was doing a structured class and lay it out, where really I was improvising my way through the subject. Part of this is because over the years of teaching the subject, as well as doing the subject, i.e. music, I became really knowledgeable at it. So I didn't have to go away like when I was younger and read up about copyright or, the 2-5-1 in jazz harmony, or how to play reverse paradiddles or whatever it was. I knew that stuff pretty well. And so I would have an idea about what I was going to do. Then, and in the old days, I used to walk into college. So as I was walking into college and I was looking at, nature, I used to be very lucky that I could walk down a canal path to get to my college rather than the road. So I would see all that stuff going on. And usually see the English countryside and that sort of aesthetic, I would sometimes completely change, okay? Completely change the subject matter, like on a whim. It's still following the learning outcomes, but the thing I was going to do, I scrap for something else. The idea would pop into my head. Where it would come from, I don't know. It was almost like I was daydreaming. And as I was daydreaming on my way in, it would just drop in, right? A little bit like when you come up with a good riff or a good tune, or you're playing great jazz on a gig, it still seems to drop in from outside. Then when I walked into the class, the third thing would kick in is that you might sit down and then the student might say something, and then you would be faced with the conversation, and they're all animated and they're all contributing because they have their world and they've expressed their world to me. And I can either say, shut up everybody, sit down, we're not going to talk about what you want, or we open it up. And what happened is that if you opened up to that, it was almost like the meaning that you had, the very first idea you had, and then the second idea and the third idea would sort of mix into a new idea that would be the class. And I noticed this sort of meaning, truth would emerge that was beyond what I could think of, beyond what my sort of random inspiration could think of, beyond what the students could think of. It was like a communal truth that emerged, in which everybody was learning something. There was a realization that was incredibly specific, but was also incredibly general. These ideas in education do not sit with the sort of cognitive, give them information, get them to learn that information, get that to them to regurgitate that information, then synthesize it with some other information and come up with some sort of conclusion. That cognitive model does follow what I'm saying, but our education system is so stiff, and I'm afraid because culturally we have moved away from a sort of liberal idea of society to a more authoritarian idea. Our education system has moved towards compliance. So they're measuring the students on compliance. That is what's happened in the schools. So I start moaning about it. I spot certain things that are going on. There's certain things going on in the education system I'm not happy with. I start mentioning this, and before I know it, rather than them opening up to you because you live in this compliant society, suddenly, after 30 years of never getting any disciplinaries, you suddenly you're on disciplinaries and your work's not good enough, and you get accused of this, you get accused of that. You fight against it not knowing that the system has changed. You cannot fight the system. That's something I really learned. As an individual can't fight the system. It's really difficult. So I end up having a very serious nervous breakdown that nearly kills me. I come out the other end of that. And what's interesting is in the sort of convalescent period of that, I start going onto YouTube. And the same thing happens again. I'm an old geezer. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. So I would wake up in the morning, I'd been thinking of an idea I could talk about on YouTube, and I'd go down and do it. But as I sat down, I would suddenly, out of nowhere, a new idea would come in. And then when I got in there and did it, something would often happen in the middle of that, that would take it on a chaotic place. And I learned rather to pause the camera when that happened, to actually let the camera run and just roll with it. And those three things became embedded there. Now, so I tell you, this morning I get up. The night before, I decided, what am I going to do for the next series of videos? Now, my idea is I have got a radio show on my Patreon, and I've come up to the last episode, and I thought, I'm going to do the last episode in 2 parts. I'm going to play my 20 favourite instrumental tracks and my favourite 20 songs. And to accompany that, I'm going to make a 4-part video series where I firstly go through my 20 favourite instrumentals. That'll be 22, 11, then 10 to 1. And then I'll do the same things with the songs. And so this morning I was about to film the first 2 episodes of that. I was going to go through the 20 instrumentals. Now, the way I would do a video like that, and this is why I've returned to this, because it's so much better for me, is I will pick the albums from my collection, which is how I started. And then when I wanted to go beyond the music that I owned, I started to put up like thumbnails. And that was brilliant, and I still do that sometimes. But I've gone back now. This is a sort of overarching idea that is in the channel, is that when I'm talking about music, I want to be holding it in my hand. So if I'm talking about Pat Metheny, I've got a record in my hand to hold. I can look at it, get inspiration from it, and also I can remember the stuff. I know I've got a reasonable memory for this stuff, but I can see who's on it, and it's like, it also reminds me of, I've known this album for probably 30, 40 years, so it reminds me of something which is far more important than just the facts about the album. So I was about to come in, pull those 20 albums out, row them up, hit the camera, and improvise my way through this sort of rough structure that I had. Then, literally, as I'm about 2 minutes away, this 2 words come into my head. As I'm about to consider what I do, the self-critical part of me just produced 2 words, and those 2 words were verbal diarrhea. It was though some part of my subconscious or some sort of something else said to me, Andy, you suffer with verbal diarrhea. I thought, I do, don't I? I thought, my skill is not that commendable as a YouTuber and as a lecturer, is that I feel totally at home, that my anxieties are allayed. I feel like I'm in a better place when, rather than all these ideas that are bursting in my head, that I let them out and I start to talk. And when I start to talk, it's as though I've found the pressure point on a horrible boil and I've pressed it, and what comes forth is this stuff. And that's why I'm not completely in control of it. I am very aware that, like, I am a surfer at the moment on top of these ideas. I don't know what I'm about to say next. Nobody does when they talk, unless they've got a checklist. And that's the whole point. Most people who speak publicly would at least have bullet points down there and they'd be following that. Whereas for me, I think one of the things I enjoy about YouTube, and one of the reasons why people watch it, is because the camera goes on. As you can see with this one, there's no fancy graphics, there's no editing. You're just going to get the raw video out the camera. It's not going to go through any editing software. This is just gone straight up from the camera to you. So if I go wrong, I've got to cover it. I've got to get through this video. I've got to improvise my way through and go through some sort of structure which is emerging as I speak. There is a structure there, and I do sort of know what I'm about to talk about. I've got an idea where I'm going, but the randomness is coming from what I'm saying. And ideas are emerging that I hadn't thought before. The great idea in here is this idea that there's sort of 3 forces at work when you do this. And these 3 forces could well be at work in all creativity. Your plan, your inspiration, and then in the doing of it, the things that come your way and how you deal with that. And that's quite profound to me. I find that profound. Now, I would not have had that idea. All I had was this thing of, which it was basically self-loathing of going, you just got verbal diarrhea, you're just going to sit and chat, for some reason people watch it. Now, this is all against the background of a number of things that have happened in relation to young people that I know in their school. There seems to be in the school this idea that you've got to watch what you say. You've got to watch where you go. Now, you all know how much I hate identity politics. It's not the ideas of identity politics I hate. It's the aspect and conclusion that our language should be controlled, that what we say should be controlled. And two instances that come up, we've talked about what happened. What would happen, for example, if some kid who's, teenager, goes down a rabbit hole online, they're watching Andrew Tate, or they've all gone down the way of adolescence, that British documentary that came out. And before you know it, they're spouting the most awful racist stuff. Now, our moral compass at the moment is that there's a number of things you could do. If a kid was to get caught stealing, as many kids have that I know, they will get a slap on the wrist. It will say, don't do that. It's not good for you to steal. You'll be let off now. And they'll be let off in this country. They'll always be let off if they go stealing from a shop. It's against the law. It's wrong. But we don't have a social taboo on stealing from shops. You are not a bad person fundamentally. You will not get labelled a fascist or a racist for stealing from a shop. In fact, the identity lot might say, well, it's not their fault. They're blank slates and they've lived their life a certain way, so they have to steal. But the blank slates who are racist, they need to be held responsible at all costs. That sort of contradiction is the thing that upsets me about that. And it's so basic and obvious, and it exists, and there's no point in arguing with it. But of course, if you say something like that, then if it is not arguable, what do you do? What you do is you tell the person to shut up. You go, no, don't want to listen. And I'm afraid our educational establishments have got like that. That is what I saw. For many years, going back when I first started teaching, it was the back end of the whole grunge thing. And then the grunge thing turned into sort of this thrash metal, death metal, black metal. And kids were singing about the worst things you could possibly think of, there was bands like Necrophilia, and you imagine what this was singing about. And I used to sit there and think, well, they're kids. These kids were kids. They used to have Christmas, and then they used to have like their presents and their mates and all that type of stuff when they were at little school. And then they become teenagers. And when you become a teenager, you look at the adults and you go, I thought the adults knew everything, but they don't. They're bloody awful. I mean, my mom's bloody drinking too much. She's going on about me smoking joints, and she's like half pissed most of the time. And my dad, all he cares about is work, right? And so they start to see this from their subjective teenage way. They are about to move from being under the cosh of their parents to forming their own worldview. Our moral view of the world goes through three stages. When we're a toddler, it's all about disgust. It's all about things, oh, you touched the dirty thing, now I can't touch you. It's all about being polluted by something else, The primal need for the child not to poison themselves, not to eat their own feces, for example, kicks in at a very young age. Then as you approach teenagerness, right, you realise that you're in a group of people, and conforming to that group becomes the overall overarching morality. And you learn how to be compliant. And schools pick up on that in their high schools, and they try and ride that and try and create a compliance based upon the current cultural view of what the world is and what the world requires. In the old days, that was for the kids to leave and go work in a factory and be happy to go but all day long. That's what the compliance was. Or to go and fight in wars. And so you see that schools are organised almost like a military structure. So people will be trained in that way. In the 1960s, you had like educationalists, psychologists like R.D. Laing, and suddenly it all became very touchy-feely, and that all the sort of educational outcomes went out the window, and all this type of stuff. And kids might be, really at one with themselves, but they couldn't read or write. With the move towards conservatism in the 1980s with Reagan in the US and Thatcher here, there was a turn to like reading, writing and arithmetic. You know, that idea which in there for Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, for their world, they were the liberators. They were the things that enabled someone to contribute in society and be a part of society. So those things were pushed, and there seemed to be a tension going on there. I went through an education system that was every year tightening it up more and more, every single year tightening it up more and more. I felt I became a better lecturer in tightening up those things. When I first started as a young teacher, it was all about me getting in there and just trying to get the students motivated and playing music, and it was a wonderful time. And I wasn't very good at all the paperwork, I never was, but I learned how to do it. But there was a certain point, as the pendulum swung the other way, that the utility of being more structured and more compliant and more orderly started to go too far the other way. And worse than that, it wasn't based upon a sort of Western liberal idea of our society. It was based upon a much more identitarian-based idea of society. You need to be compliant, you need to work like this, and you have to be a nice person. And we have decided what a nice person is, and it is this. And I think that was too far. As a liberal, I thought that was too far. If you're 16-year-old kids screaming racist stuff, I don't think the best idea is to treat them as though they are a heretic, you know, the Salem witch trials, and put them through that. It wouldn't be a wise idea. And in doing that, if you were to do that, the cognitive dissonance in terms of the way the kids see the world, and this is very postmodern, what I'm saying is the kid has a phenomenological, subjective view of the world. Now, I think education is to change the idea in the mind of that the child that needs to have their bloody R&D. You got stuck here. See how many minutes? 20 minutes of total articulate talk, and now bloody tripped up. And that's what you're watching. There could be a mouse drying up. I need something to drink, and I haven't got a drink. So yeah, there might be ideas that you disagree with, and a teenager might be spouting that. And that could just be a cathartic expression of their confusion of having to enter the adult world, and their sort of childlike revulsion of the lack of morality that actually exists within the adults. And that grist is the grist that created rock and roll. That's what rock and roll has. All us old guys are all looking, we're all moaning and looking because we want our rock music to have that, even though we're not that, and none of the bands we like are that anymore. This is the thing. This is what you have to do. It's these ideas you have to deal with to really understand what's going on. So I thought that the way you deal with that is much like you deal with a racist. You don't deal with a racist by telling them to shut up and hope for their racism to go away because you can't hear it. Have they stopped speaking and saying all the nasty racist things now? Yeah. Oh, good. So I don't have to hear it, so I can imagine it doesn't exist anymore. Right? And that lid's been on society. It hasn't been dealt with. Right? It was being dealt with from the 60s to the 70s to the 1980s. It was being dealt with. The 90s starts to slip over. And for the last 20 years, and definitely the last 10 years, the identity-based solution to racism and prejudice has now been enacted across our education systems. And lo and behold, we are now in a fractured society where no one's tolerant anymore. And when I stand up and point it out, I also get shouted at. And they sit there going, I don't want to know Andy's version of how to get rid of racism because I've decided he was a racist anyway when he supported Charlie Kirk's free speech. So I'm just unsubscribed from him and I don't want to hear him. Has he stopped talking yet? Right. So I don't think that's the way to do it. When I was a kid, a lot of incredible films dealt with racism. There was a brilliant film with Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis. Can't remember what it's called. I feel it was called The Defiant Ones, but I'm not too sure. They were in a prison. They got chained together. Tony Curtis is like a serious racist, and Sidney Poitier is a black guy because he was a black guy, right? And they escape and they're chained together. They have to work together. And of course, this is how you get rid of racism. I hate to say it, but racism is based upon a fear of the unknown. Human beings fear the unknown, right? That is what it is. They fear the unknown. Creative people, you can't get people to listen to your music because people don't know it. And when you say I've got a new song, you want to listen to it, they don't go, oh, whoopee do, new music to listen to. They go, I don't know what this music is. I don't want to listen to it. I have no interest in it. I want you to take it away. Everything in life is that. That's a human thing, right? So you have your prejudices about absolutely everything, until you experience it. Multiculturalism is so important. It's such a positive thing, but it will only work if you live in an overarching tolerant society, which means you've got to let the teenagers scream and shout racism. You've just got to let them do it, right? And your people in the people they're being racist again, they should be in a liberal, tolerant, overarching system. So they need to go, oh, these kids, bloody awful, isn't it? There's a situation happened with a kid I knew where when they were little, they loved rap, loved hip hop, and they'd done some videos where they'd been miming and dancing to some hip hop. And it looked like their mouth was, saying the words. Then many years later, kids trying to bully them found a video where, as a 6-year-old, they mouthed the N-word. And at that point, they destroy that person. I told this story to a friend of mine who's black, and they, being an intelligent, reasonable person, went, well, your daughter didn't know what they were doing, you know what I mean? And in the end, why should she not be able to say that word? Why can't you say that word? Why can I say? And came across completely reasonable. I think we need to allow people to say what they want to say, express themselves in the way they want. If we're right about being tolerant and not racist, the truth will come out. But if you try and censor it, it won't come out, and so it will fester, and you will never have the chance to deal with it in a way that will actually get rid of it. You will just make yourself feel better because you were able to exert power against the racist. So what's this got to do with me teaching and all this type of thing? When I sit down to talk on these videos, I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. And I believe that this process is incredibly cathartic and very, very useful. As I have been doing this, because I can't stop being the educationalist that I always have been, I think for young people, this could be a very useful way of accessing their creativity, is to see that the art forms we have now are no longer books. They're no longer even films. They're no longer poetry. It's no longer painting. Those are old art forms that went with the context of those times. We can still look at them and appreciate them. And with knowledge, you can extract great joy from this stuff still, obviously. But the new art forms now are YouTube videos. The new art forms are TikTok videos. They're posts on Instagram. They're memes. They are, what else would they be? Computer games, interactive environments, right? This is the new art forms. And these art forms are going to become like the products that the products were in the Industrial Revolution. You know, the cotton that these black slaves in America picked and sent to the UK to then be made into those cotton mills. And then people that were working in a factory, which wasn't far off the experience of the black slaves, although it was nowhere near as horrendous in terms of their rights. But the little kids that were running around under the spinning jennies or whatever they were called, trying to get the bits of cloth out and losing hands, and then, you know, all that type of stuff was all horrendous as well. People working 12-hour days, never get any time off, dying young. The Industrial Revolution, that was built on the product, which was the fabric they were creating. That pumped out of my country, went all around the world and created a huge amount of wealth. And that wealth enabled my country to get strong. And luckily, although we did whatever every empire does when it gets strong and has got power. It then went off to get new territories. You know, why do a deal, you know, with China for tea when you can take over India and then get to grow your tea there in India, and then you got your own tea and then you can sell that. And so, yes, my country became very powerful. But luckily, whilst they got powerful off the back of the Industrial Revolution. And thank God, a little chink of light opened up in that, which was Enlightenment thinking. Enlightenment thinking created the Industrial Revolution, and then the Industrial Revolution spreads Enlightenment thinking to more and more people. So books, newspaper articles, all these sorts of things replaced the church as the main vessel for normal people to get some sort of information. The control lessened, much like the internet has happened now. Those methods of communication, you know, the pictures, lithographs, the arts, the poetry, the pamphlets, the books, became art forms, but they were seen as art forms retrospectively. The novel, the great novel, you know, when we read, you know, Soldier Nixon or The Great Gatsby, we have to remember that we have to go back to books like, you know, Justine or Molly Flanders, or these books which were, well, pornographic in nature. The novel was spread there to start off with, and then it turned into a literary art form. And now we can look at Molly Flanders as almost, well, it is a huge, great piece of art as well. So we are now exiting the industrial age. There are no longer those jobs anymore. People don't need a bigger population to just feed into the factories. And the descendants of those factory workers have just stood there thinking, there's nothing for me anymore. And there isn't. And they're aware of it. And when they start to say and complain about it, they get shouted down by the establishment, and they get told they're racists and fascists, right? They're upset, maybe misdirected. You know, they most likely blaming immigrants for their problems, and that's the case. But as I said, I would let people have their say. I would not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I would listen and take it on board. We need a government that's going to do that right now. I don't want to get political. I want to stick on the idea of education and the arts. So, you know, bearing all that in mind, it's very hard not to stray into the political here. On this video, I'm putting out an idea, and I'm hoping that it might gain traction in some way, probably won't. Our education system needs, the pendulum needs, it's been held on. It's been held on by the establishment. It's held on by people who are terrified of losing control. And it's held on by the sort of establishment identitarian idea of morality. We have to let that go. It's got to swing back. We've got to swing back to free expression. We've got to swing back to the idea of catharsis. And we have to swing back and let the kids relax. They need to be able to do their thing. And our education systems need to be malleable to do that. Now, how do you do that? You have to value the arts. And the arts are no longer painting, they're no longer music, right? So when you go into an education establishment, they won't say, but they're trying to break that bit down. We don't want taxpayers' money being spent on kids doing music courses and art courses and painting. We need to make the situation, we need people who understand STEM subjects. Well, that'll only be a small percentage of the top population. Well, they're the only ones who count, really, because they're us. The rest of them, you know, just tell them they should be doing that. Why? Well, even if they can't do it, at least they morally know that's what you should be doing. But they won't. They'll just sit at home on their benefits taking drugs because their lives will be meaningless. No, they won't, because everyone's a blank slate and I've got a big fridge, you know. And before you know it, you're in the situation you're in at the moment. So, I think that this idea of verbal diarrhea, this idea that you can sit there and start to talk and not be in control of what you're saying, right? That these three elements come together, and it is this is what is meant by giving people a voice. That is what it's meant. I have just spent half an hour explaining this in great detail to you, so you understand what that means. Giving people a voice means you have to face with the terror that they might say something you don't like. And then you have to say, even though I don't like it, I have to accept the fact that I might be as wrong as them for not liking it, then we can get back to an education system that people will be motivated to turn up and go to, basically. And why? Because they are able to pull these ideas together, to not to sit in a pool of depression and anxiety, because they are not riding that wave that I'm riding right now. So those thoughts that they're having aren't backing up and banging up against the dam that's been forced in there by the establishment education system. We kick that dam down, right? We kick that down and we let it flow. And because it's been blocked up, it's going to be nasty. And it is nasty. And if there is nasty ideas now abounding everywhere. The information system that is the internet has created art forms, and those art forms are directly related to things like pornography and violence, as they always has been. That is what we see. We have to see them as art forms, and we have to run with that. We have to scrap the idea of having music classes in schools. You know, we have to scrap the idea of art classes. What we need to do is have a central creativity, because when you teach painting to someone, that is because there was a very complex lifelong skill set that you had to acquire to be able to become an artist and paint a great big fat cow that then would send out in the Victorian era to normal people who would queue up in an art gallery to look at painting of a big fat cow, to be able to go, that's a big fat cow, because big fat cows were really important, you know, back in the Victorian era. You know, nowadays, of course, big fat cows are usually seen on the internet spouting how, you know, they should love themselves, and we, you know, well, that's a joke, by the way, and I decided halfway through to not pursue it. Andy, why do you say these horrible things? Because they pop into my head. I don't want to be talking with some joke, you know, about them looking at a big fat cow in the Victorian era, and then now we still look at big fat cows on Instagram and have a laugh at them, but you're not supposed to have a laugh at them, but we do, ha ha ha, you know, whatever. I don't know. This stuff comes out of my mouth, right? So the skill set was huge. Can you still paint? Of course you can paint. But if you're a painter now, you're going to be able to get traction, because painting is actually really good. Because if you're a painter, you can photograph your painting and you could stick it up on the internet. Visual things work better than oral things on the internet. That's the bottom line. That's why music's hard and painting's easier. Poetry is easier. Twitter is basically poetry. And so words and pictures have become more important. Photography has become more important. Spoken word has become more important. So where does music fit in all of this? Music is the magical art form, right? You could see a painting and it will affect you, but the visceral impact of music, because our hearing is the most powerful super sense we have, the one that can go around corners and is in sort of 3 dimensions. We can hear what's behind us, in front of us, far away, close, you know, all these types of things. And because our emotions are wound in much more to our hearing, because as you talk to someone, you have your eyes on them, that intellectual surface stuff, but in the background, your fear mechanism is wired in, you know, so you could be talking, and as soon as you hear a noise behind you, it will be like that. Music pulls into that. Music has always been much more about the subconscious. It's much more about visceral energies. It's much more about gut feeling. This is why the establishment critical class, who have told the story of 20th century popular music, have always wanted to err against the songwriters that wrote songs and be able to look at them in terms of, you know, the meaning of their lyrics and the cultural context politically in which they work, which is usually a sort of leftist idea of what is good. And there's no problem with that. That's where that was actually needed in the 60s and 70s. Seems a bit passé now, doesn't it? If somebody came out, you know, doing what they were doing in the 1960s, we know exactly the people who would be telling them to shut up if they were creating as much stink as the 60s artists were. But that's a contradiction, doesn't want to be dealt with, does it? You know, I try and deal with this stuff here. This is what I'm trying to do here on this video, is deal with that stuff. So what we have to see is you could be a painter, you could be a poet, but you could also be a computer games designer, or you could be a podcaster. They're all equal. Now, the reason why kids do examinations and the reason why they do essays is because of the technology of the time, which was a written paper technology. someone would answer a bunch of questions, and then their answers would be judged and marked. And through that, examination criteria emerged. Now we have a system that if someone's written an essay, it's not a knowledgeable lecturer that has just been put there because they really know the subject, who just goes, yeah, I've read that. Yeah, I think that's a B+. Right, that is literally what it was like. I was taken on as a lecturer because I knew about music, and someone would come in and perform, and I would watch them, and I go, that's really good. I give that a distinction. Yeah, they're really good. What about their understanding of the process of rehearsing? You've got to understand this. This cognitive model of learning means if you go to music college, what you actually get marked on is this. Go in a band, learn some songs, rehearse those songs, perform those songs, evaluate those songs. You have that dialectic there. Rehearse, perform, evaluate. So you have to evidence your rehearsals. Now, you would think that just videos of you rehearsing, someone goes, yeah, they've rehearsed really well. We can't get a mark out of that. So you have to evaluate how well they rehearse. So they've got to have information there. So it starts to become like a tick list. When they do the performance, we're going to film that performance. That's fine. That bit of evidence is practical. More and more, I saw that practical part taken away. In that, the assessment criteria for the practical wasn't how good they were. It was, did they do this? Did they do that? And the video would just be, yes, they have. So it would be a pass. No quality would be assigned to the criteria, except for this. When I was teaching, the criteria for a distinction for performance was to perform with flair. Right? So, I took that, as if they were to tie a bit of chiffon to their wrist in a sort of Steven Tyler-like way. That's flair as far as I could see. That's my definition of flair. So I would then have to impose what I thought flair actually was, tell the students that, and then mark them on that. And I was inventing my own criteria. I was doing that anyway, you always do. But then you would get to the evaluation. And the evaluation, we would have to be very strict on, almost dictating to them what they need to write. Them just being self-aware and examining what they did was not enough. We had to make sure that they came out with a list of things they wanted to achieve, whether they did achieve them, why they didn't achieve them. They had to describe it and then explain it. And this is all good stuff, and it was good to train kids to write like that. The truth is, we have this now, we have examinations now all the time, but they're not paper examinations. They happen online. They're podcasts, they're discussions, they're interviews. The whole of the education system could be teaching kids how to access the technology, how to utilize computers, how to know how money is made online, know how the different software works, create podcasts, create video blogs, create creative films, ask themselves, interviewed, I've just said monologues, all these things could be actually then put into the pot. And a student could create a portfolio that exists online. And if all they've learned is how to create their portfolio online, they have created the skills that are going to be there. If any skills are there once AI kicks in, it will be those skills, right? And our education system you could sit down, and this is the other thing you need to do. We need to go back to having experts. You assess an expert, which is what happens, right? I come on here, I talk online. Right, you watch it. If people think I'm saying something useful, more people subscribe. If I was talking nonsense, I think I probably wouldn't have the subscribers. So I'm very aware that as much as even when I'm doing, the greatest kneecaps in dance music, I don't know, whatever it is, I know when I'm going through that, I'm touching explaining a world which it shows that world from a certain perspective. And when I do Philosophy Sunday, I'm able to get right down deep into something. Now, why do I do this on the Philosophy Sunday? Why did I do this Philosophy Sunday video? It'd be much better to do a top 10 and get 10 or 20,000 views. This will do at best 5. But there's the fact that there's quality here. There's quality in the watchers. There's fair weather watchers, and then there's high quality watchers, and the high quality watchers come here because they want something like this. They want a discussion like this, and they're engaging in this discussion on the level I'm saying it. I'm not lecturing to anybody. We're having a discussion. People are sat there going, I agree with that. And all I'm doing is I'm probably adding a sharp point to what thoughts you've had, perhaps. Maybe a few things that, I'm not saying my answers are correct, but yeah, maybe we do need to do those two things. Scrap paper. I can remember chatting to a business guy once, and he said, we were chatting about ways of improving businesses, and he said, "Oh, there's things you could do practically that everyone can get involved with, and it will really help the business." He said, "What?" I said, "What?" Like, he said, "Just going paperless." Oh God, yeah, that would just go completely. Yeah, that would be good. That would. So why are we still getting people to write Word documents and submit them? And I have to be honest, the education system, those XLR documents, spreadsheets. Right. I used to call our management spreadsheet Nazis. That's probably why they wanted to get rid of me. But they were. Could you produce some sort of spreadsheet? Could you fill this spreadsheet in? Your creative students that you're marking, could you put the feedback on this spreadsheet? We have a problem. There's loads of solutions. One of them lies in education. We have to stop being frightened about what people say. We have to stop being frightened of what teenagers say. We need to be the grown-ups. And when they're spouting something terrible or horrible, not get all frightened and, think it's going to be like adolescence and they're going to go off killing somebody or whatever. What you're going to do is let them do it and let that rage just crash against the beach rather than the rocks. To crash against the beach and then just let down and then slowly, gently roll its way back in, and then breathe out. So you have this breathing in and out natural, without all the crashing of white spray, just in and out. Like when you're having a panic attack, the thing, the square, in, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, in, through the nose, hold. I've got a bit out of time now, but I'll get there in the video because I'm very hyperactive at the moment in the middle of this. But sometimes you need to do this. That thing? That's what we need to have with the discussion. We've got to see free speech like that. We've got to see art like that. We've got to enable people to be able to express themselves. We need to value that. And we need to value the things that all good people have. Not ability to do maths or technology, but to be decent, loving, tolerant people, right? And the way we do that is not by being intolerant to the intolerant ones. We have to be tolerant. You know why this idea of tolerance and freedom emerged in the Western liberal democracies? Why? Because at the center of it, we had a really simple mantra, I suppose. We had a spiritual and esoteric idea that was deep in our culture and our society, despite all the horrendous things we did. At the center of it was this idea: love thy neighbor as though love thy neighbor as though they are yourself. See, the thing is, as I got to that point, I sometimes have this thing when I'm talking, I can be very articulate, but that's because I don't know what I'm about to say. Often, and you may experience this yourself, when you do know what you're about to say, you doubt it. And even that phrase, Jesus' phrase from the Bible, love thy neighbor. And now I've got here, I can't remember it because I was building up to it and I can't remember it. I just said how wide it is into our culture and yet I can't remember it. Can't remember it. Look, what is it? Is it love thy neighbour as you would yourself? Or is it don't covet next door's neighbour's donkey? I can't remember now. See, I was never that good, I'm not a Christian. I'm trying my best, to spread love like an idiot. I've got to the end of this video now and I've basically, I did such a great video and then right at the end, I've tripped myself up, haven't I? Bloody embarrassed myself here. Love thy neighbours as you would yourself. Judge not, lest ye shall be judged. I remember that was it. That was just popped in from nowhere. Let's go with that. Let's scrub it out. Right, forget, because it doesn't really matter about the meaning of this video. Just scrap it. Right, so I'll do that again now. So, we've grown up with an idea that comes from the Bible that is wrought into Western civilization. And that is the idea of this. Judge not, lest ye shall be judged. Those who are without sin can cast the first stone. I've got two there. What else? You can lead a horse to water, but a pencil must be led. What are you doing, Andy, at the end of this video? You've done a very good job here and been very articulate and serious. There's been no tomfoolery, no joking. And then right till you get, you knew you were going to do about an hour for Philosophy Sunday. A bloody hour you're going to sit and chat to. You got verbal diarrhea, you have. And there we have the beginning of the thing. We're at the beginning of the end. I've got verbal diarrhea. What's all this silliness at the end? Why are you belittling what Jesus Christ said? Because meaning, when you get to meaning, it is never solid. And it's never ephemeral. It can be the nonsense that exists in the English sense of humour, right? The English aesthetic that I talk about is in our humour, and it is in our countryside. That's where it exists for me, okay? There is a wisdom in silliness. I've going back to be very serious. But there is. I am absolutely lost now. I think, and the thing is, as I know, this me being lost at the end of the video, I've lost it. But the thing is, what is it that comes in and steams in and make, I could now switch this off and then film a little bit more and get a nice conclusion and feel like I've done a good platonic job on YouTube. But this has come along, I've lost it. I know what it is. It's because I'm not a Christian. And there I am spouting Christian stuff. I know, and I'm sat there thinking all the Christians are going to go, good on you, Andy, good on you. Like I'm on their side, and I'm not. And then all the atheists will go, oh God, Andy's a bloody Christian spout. And I'm not an atheist either. I'm not any of these things. But it's interesting that I've got down to sort of a spiritual idea at the end of this video. I'll finish with this. If you believe there's a God, then what that God is the ultimate consonance of the universe. It means the universe has a meaning. When you say, I believe in God, you are saying, I believe the universe has a meaning. And I believe I'm a part of it and I'm a part of that meaning, right? Fundamentally, from what I have thought about over 57 years. That's what God is. If you believe as an atheist in materialist universe, that is your God. Everybody believes in God, right? If you don't, you fall into the black chasm of chaos where anxiety and depression reside. So we have to believe in something. We have to believe in something. What do we believe in? Well, we believe in something that's probably is not true. Is too outlandish. We have our idea of how the world works, and chaos abounds, and we see senseless, meaningless things. How can you say that the world's meaningful? When kids get shot through their head, at 2 years old, trying to find a bloody loaf of bread to stay alive. What meaning is there in that? And how do I react like that? And you can then shake your fist as God, as the heroes did in the Greek myths, where they turned around and stood up to God. We could stand up to God and we can accept God. We can say God doesn't exist, or we can say God does exist. But in the end, if you believe that the meaning of the universe comes from God, great. I agree with you. But if you don't, then you have to ask yourself where it comes from. And you will say it's negotiated by human beings. So what you will be saying is, one person says, I think this is a good thing. And then everyone goes, yeah, I think you're right. And eventually that sort of consonance of ideas in humanity, this is why it's called being a humanitarian, then coalesces into sort of an overarching good. So it's a negotiation between the individual and the community. Politics is that negotiation as well. That's where they come from. I would add something else in there. You cannot do it through facts. You cannot logically get to the idea of where good is. You have to be able to feel what it's like to be somebody else. You have to have your own subjective view, but then your humanity is to see someone else's point of view. The reason why the British abolished slavery, because suddenly they were able to see it from the slave's point of view. That's what the Enlightenment did. And that came out of the science of realizing all human beings were the same, and there wasn't much racial differences there really. And the art of being personalized and going beyond the religious to being able to discuss how people individually felt. That was a thing that happened in the Renaissance. You know, when we look at the art of Michelangelo or Raphael or any of those Renaissance painters and sculptors, we aren't just seeing depictions of God, we are seeing the man, we are seeing the genius of Michelangelo. When we look at old religious artifacts before then, we don't know who the artist is. That idea of the individual, you know, and the way they relate, that's where that happens. And then through seeing art, you know, by watching films and listening to music, you get to see the humanity of other people. And within that, a very complex negotiation comes in that I am not able to describe here. If I was able to describe it, we wouldn't need art. So the negotiation of morals comes through art. That's where it happens. The negotiation of quality comes through art. If you believe that it's God, then you believe that the art is being reflected. You know, God's. This is why we have the Bible, because people believe that, even though they know that people physically wrote it down, but the word of God is coming through. If you're a humanitarian, you think that no, there's some sort of collective goodness that the artist has just been divinely inspired to. And the truth is that if you are really honest in your assessment, you cannot pull those two apart. Actually, the random thing that I described, the dropping in of those words, verbal diarrhea, as I drove down the drive-in to here to do this video, a little bit like the things that people describe when they start praying, that they start praying and they say what they want to say and they express themselves and they show their love to the universe, God, whatever it is. And then out of nowhere, answers come back. Out of nowhere, answers come back. Sometimes people will meditate and there's a different answers. Answers, where do they come from? We don't know. But whatever it is and however you're describing it, it's everybody describing a different thing but looking at the same object because they have a slightly different viewpoint. And the fact that we have a slightly different viewpoint of the same thing is a description of our consciousness and how we reside in the universe. So as I get to the last hour, that chaos that just emerged as I tried to deal with religion rather than art and threw myself up, I've been able to talk myself to a place. I don't know what I just said. I don't know what I just said then. Right? It was like I was listening to it like you were listening to it. I've talked for an hour. I'm able to allow myself to get on that surfboard and ride the wave. And then whatever I just said then was the meaning of this video. Do I own it? I don't feel like I do. If I hadn't sat down and done this video, I wouldn't be thinking it. I didn't have whatever I just said then. And it seemed to make sense. Right then, when I described us all having our own viewpoint and describing our own viewpoint, we're actually looking at the same thing, but different sides of it. That there's a metaphor, is a metaphor for everything. You see one side of it, someone sees another side of it, and then you look at their version of it because you can't see their side of it, but they can sort of try and describe it. That's what art is. Their description of what the other side is. And then you suddenly go, oh yeah, that adds up because I'm looking at that. But it's not looking at a material object. It's looking at quality. It's looking at how we react to things, what makes our emotions positive or negative, and what then constitutes a good life, which is our emotions being positive. I'm done. That's done. That bit's done. Well, that's an interesting idea. The next stage for my YouTube is to get some people on. Some people on that, I mean, I do sometimes now and then, but maybe I need to get some people that, I need to have them in the room. These Zoom chats are okay. That's the next stage, isn't it? I need to create a conversation. I can't just keep talking to myself. Useful though it is. Thank you for watching the Philosophy Sundays. They are my favourite bit. You know, I get up in the morning and I go, shall I do this? The videos about bloody top 10s are actually quite hard to do, and you really are ducking and diving when you do those. When I wake up and I know I'm about to do a Philosophy Sunday, I always love it. And I always love it because I'm picturing you listening. So you lot are contributing to it. That's the thing, you see. Right? I'm talking to you lot and you talk to me. The thing I do that other YouTubers don't do is every night I go through all the comments, or as many as I possibly can. When I put a heart on them, it doesn't mean I love your comments. It means I've read your comments. That's what it means. And I take that and then I react to it. So there is a dialectic, there is a conversation going on. And I'm so aware of this that I am trying to create a consonance between what I'm saying and what you're feeling. I'm trying to be at once contentious and get you riled up, at the same time also get you to go, yeah, there's something right about that. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm aiming for that. That's the surfboard I'm trying to get on. See, I haven't finished. I'm deep within it. Got a session to do now. Got a tabla player turning up. We're going to have a jam. I'm going to record that. Life's sweet. Well, mine is at the moment. I hope yours is. I send you all my love. I send you all the best art, best music. And if you could just get up tomorrow morning after watching my video and look at your day and try and spend it in the realm of art as much as you possibly can. That is what I suggest. And if you're a parent, enable your kids to do that and see that as the fundamental goal of their educational process. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like on the video, go to my Patreon, become a member here, or just put a little bit of cash in my PayPal tip jar so that I don't, drop down that Maslow pyramid to the bottom and can't do these talks anymore because I'm just worried about, having some new pants and some food on the table. So that would help a lot. Thank you and see you on the next one.